Welcome to Life on Mars. I'm Alex, CEO and founder, and I will be your host today. And in this episode, we'll be talking to Pau Minoves, CTO at Typeform. You know, one of the longest standing and hottest startups in Barcelona that recently raised 135 million in funding in their Series C round. And what we'll be talking about today is deployments. We'll be talking about architecture at scale. We'll be talking about company culture for developers, hiring and maintaining the team of developers, how they spur innovation into the company, how they evaluate the proposals coming bottom up from the developers and all the team members, and how they go all the way to production, how they deploy as seamlessly as possible with a friction-free development environment. This is a concept that I really liked about this conversation and Typeform in particular, which is a company that has undergone several changes. A few years back, both co-founders took a step down and they relegated themselves from the leadership positions to reallocate themselves into product. They brought in an operations person to kind of like scale the company, took it into a more professional level, and the company has grown to hundreds and hundreds of developers and people. So it is very interesting because Typeform is also not the kind of company you see or hear about every day, because they are pretty seclusive in what they share to the press and whatnot. So it's very rare that they speak at events or podcasts. I'm super happy that we could have Pau. We are good friends with the company. As a matter of fact, David, the former CEO, has spoken a couple of times in the podcast, in the Startup Grind events, in our conference. We've got one person from Typeform in our Startup Grind team as well. So it's pretty easy if you have got great relationships, and I'm happy to have developed this sort of relationship with a company like Typeform. That being said, from the company side, there will be a small break in the podcast during the month of August. Most likely, we will not be releasing any new episode during the month of August. You will be getting a couple more episodes this month that they have already been recorded, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break here to come back with renewed strength and energies in September, because we've crossed the 50 episodes line. So thank you very much for your support, for your sharing on social media, for your suggestions, sending speakers, sending new topics to cover. If you're so kind, subscribe and like the podcast on whatever platform you consume this, because that helps the company and the podcast grow. And there will be some interesting things coming your way through the podcast in the next season of Life on Mars, coming from September onwards. So stay tuned. And without further ado, let's jump right into this episode. Welcome to the show, Pau. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Alex. I'm good. How are you?
Fine. Excited to record this podcast because, not every day you listen or you hear from somebody at Typeform. Typeform has been kind of like a company operating on their own in the Barcelona startup ecosystem, so much that even people in the US think that Typeform is a US-based company. So why do you think that happens, and why are you guys not that, outgoing and talking to media that much? Like, why is it that difficult to get you?
I can tell you, 10 years after being founded, that still happens to us when we go to San Francisco. When we meet people there, they still think we are a San Francisco company. I think the merit of this is on the founders very, very much. They always had a very broad mindset. They also raised capital outside, and the early company got a lot of talent from abroad in a very broad sense. A lot of people that actually relocated to Barcelona for Typeform. And this created, I think, the culture we have today, which is very, very international. We have like 50, 60 nationalities in the company, and we have that from very, very early on. So it's kind of a rara avis, both in Barcelona and in the world.
It's funny how you say that this is the merit of the founders, and I think it is, in a sense, because if you get all the press without you needing it and without you going after and chasing it, it's that means that you've got a really, really good company. One really quick story here before we go into the chat is that we run these events that are called Startup Grind, and when I started them, I was onboarded in February 2014. The CEO of Startup Grind told me, like, okay, now that you got the chapter, who are the first 10 speakers you're going to get for the chapter? And because it's kind of like an assignment, you have to do kind of like a proposal of a project and whatnot. And among the list of speakers, there was David from Typeform, right? I was like, dude, you're not going to get somebody from Typeform to speak at your event in Barcelona. I'm like, why not? I know them already. They are in Barcelona. And he was like, no, they are from here, from California. So the CEO of Start Brian thought that Typeform was from California. I was like, no, dude, I've been to their offices. Literally, there are 5 people in Barcelona, so something like that. Anyways, let's get into it because I really I think people listen to this podcast to listen to the speakers, not to me. But we had quite a lot of topics to talk about today, and one of them is we're going to be covering your friction deployment, ownership in code and teams, how you guys scale up your teams and development and whatnot. And you've been the CTO at Time for 3 years now. So basically, what are the top lessons learned that you have got and you have acquired in these 3 years as CTO at Typeform?
Many. It's been a journey. 3 years at the scale up really are like dog years. They count like many. We started on a very special situation in 2019 when I joined. There was, I think, around 50 something developers on an almost 100 employee company. We came from a huge period of growth and success, which was also tricky, right? Like managing success and managing a scale up is always very difficult, and you contract technical debt and managerial debt and many kinds of debt, right? So joining was an exercise of talking to everybody, trying to be very, very humble, to listen, like what's working, what's not working, and what can we do? Where can you go from here? But also an exercise of clarity in the vision, like why are we here? Where are we going, right? And should we all sign up for that? So after having these many conversations, and if somebody joins the scale up, I really recommend you give yourself the first 2 months to just do that. It's very easy to see a lot of broken pieces and then just jump quickly to give obvious solutions to these problems and misunderstanding the root causes and not really listening to the people, which is obviously the most important thing on all these things. In Typeform, and I think that's common, if you have this many technical talent, right, and this huge success, you will find a very huge imbalance of very good things. Technologically, like very good things, like very state-of-the-art advanced thinking, but at the same time, a lot of basics not working. So the first lesson was an exercise of let's learn to walk before we run. Let's go back to the basics. Let's get the basics right. We won't stop doing that. A lot of ideas from big companies like Fang or Netflix companies. The company has just finished a migration to microservices, which was a 1 year long project that was unfinished, of course.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of this. That's good stuff, right? That's good stuff. That's where we need to go, right? But then 70% of the code bases were not owned by anybody. So there was a lot of dark areas, a lot of accountability issues. There was a lot of people being called in the night because they wrote that service 2 years ago and they were the only person that know how that service works. So you need to go to the basics and let's clean that up and then work from here. And this is what we started doing. So I think my first advice for somebody that goes into a similar mission is give yourself time to really diagnose what's going on.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the first day of a CTO in a startup is always complex, but the first day of a CTO in a scale up, it's basically identifying all the pieces. To my understanding, it's because I've never been the CTO in a scale up, but it's identifying all the moving pieces in the company and saying like, okay, who owns this? Who owns that? Is it still needed? Are we keeping the lights on in this project? What is this? What is this exactly? Because you will find many parts that are like, what is exactly this and who did it? Is this person still in the company, right? How did you go about this process of auditing everything that you had in the company running at the same time? Because I assume like there were side projects that they were not being maintained, lots of funny ideas that, maybe they were working, but not sufficiently attractive to business. So how did you audit all that stuff?
When I've done this on the past, I was under time pressure. I had to group people in teams and just talk with them. In Typeform, I had the luxury to give myself time and I could talk individually with everybody on the engineering and security departments, at least once, in many cases, more than one. And it's very important to go to that meeting with an empty notepad and just ask, what do you want to talk about? And if the person needs, something to start talking, then just give me 3 things you like, 3 things you don't like, right? And let's take it from there. Just going very, very empty and a blank slate, because you are leadership, you are the CTO, you join to do something, but at the same time, you are the last person to come through the door, right? You are the person who knows less. And so embrace that and have these conversations. Those conversations will take you places, right? You don't need anything more sophisticated than just truly listening, and then try to go back to those people with, this is what I think is going on. This is what I think I would do. What do you think about this, right? And see which things got traction, which other issues unearth when you try to fix something, right? When something's broken, it's broken for a reason, right? If it was trivial to be fixed, somebody would have fixed it already. So sometimes you need to go deeper. So I think that was my first 2 months, and it's what I would do again, to be honest.
But it seems that you joined with a very adaptive mindset, right? You said that you were taking one-on-ones, that you decided to talk to everybody in the engineering teams and whatnot. But that's not the case in a lot, especially in scale-ups, when companies hire an external CTO, external C-levels, that they come from much more senior positions, and they come maybe from the corporate industry. You know, you're a company, you raise your Series A, and you're like, okay, now I'm going to hire somebody like a VP of Vodafone or a VP of HP, VP of whatever to be my CTO, CFO, COO, whatnot, and they come with their own culture, right? So how did you avoid clashing with a Typeform's existing company culture?
So here is a good thing. Here's a couple of good things that Typeform is specific. One is Typeform was, and that's what pulled me, it's one of the things that pulled me into the project at the very beginning. Typeform was a scale-up that was having growing pains and reacting to that quickly enough, or early enough, let's say like this. So Typeform, the new leadership at Typeform joined with, we have a year to go to start launching the rocket ship in a way, which is a message that we used a lot back then. So you had time. In previous situations, I have unfortunately faced that they call senior management when everything is burning, the money is running out, the talent is already leaving, right? Typeform,
so like right now in 2022, every company is going to implode.
Yeah, that's happening across the board. That's true. But Typeform was very smart in that regard. And I think I attribute also that to the founders, who were very, very smart and say, you know what, let's step down, let's stay on leadership, but let's get other leadership in. So that gave us a very important breathing space to do that. That's necessary. The other thing is Typeform has always had a very strong culture. So going in there with a very strong, this is my culture, this is what we are gonna do, is your shortest way out. It's not gonna work. You are in for a lot of pain. And in every company, but especially in Typeform. And when we joined, we initially recognized that the Typeform culture had things that need improving and fixing, but a lot of good stuff. There was a lot of bottoms up. There was a lot of innovation in the DNA. There was a lot of design culture. I've never seen an engineering team that is so product oriented, right? There was a strong sense of team autonomy. Teams had and appreciated a lot decision-making power about their own roadmaps. And these are things that if you are in a more corporate culture, if you want to create, and it's probably going to take you years to create and sponsor those things. Typeform had that on day one. So we immediately set success as in we need to change the culture to better. But if we lose those things along the way, we failed, right? So let's make sure we nurture this. I think that also forces you to be very open-minded and respectful of what's there.
And how did you? No, that's really good, because if you actually, for our audience, let me plug in one of the earliest episodes. We interviewed David actually, and actually that was in Startup Brand. It was not on this podcast, so pardon me. But basically, he explained how they devised all of this strategic way of leading people through their kind of, like, giving example and whatnot. And you could see that they're super designer oriented because they're designers, the founders. And the moment they stepped down, or they stepped aside for a new leadership team to come, but they stayed as kind of like product people only. I felt like these guys are fucking special. Like this company's gonna be so big, it's not even funny. But anyways, going back to your point. yeah, obviously, you adapted, you absorbed the culture, you listened to everybody, but still, you brought in many ideas that were new to the company. Before we go into the ideas, how did you deal with existing people who thought that they were going to become the CTO, especially the most senior people in the engineering team? Did you suffer from any kind of setback with the existing people, the most senior people, and any kind of friction with that kind of profiles in the company?
Not really, and that's a common problem when you join a scale up on this thing, that there isn't a structure. I have to say, when I joined, that the structure was already almost gone or completely gone. I'm not kidding. When I joined, there were 50, 60 developers, one director of IT, managing IT, which was 6 people, I think back then, even less, probably like 4 people, and then nothing else, which also forced me, and I was good, the full immersion into let's just talk to all these people individually and let's build it from there. Obviously, as we got in and we started to have a better idea where we wanted to go, we also started to get some of these people up the ranks, right? Like who wants to lead? Who wants to be part of this change? And then we got, I think, a mixture of 7 to 8 new team leads. Back then, I think half of them were latest recruits and half of them were people from internal. I think you have to do these mixes, and it's healthy.
Okay, and how did you? Let's talk about the ideas now. What ideas did you bring from other companies? And especially, was there any idea that you thought, wow, this worked in this company I did in the past, this company I worked in the past, but didn't work in Typeform?
Yes, of course, we tried a lot of things. I think the one that we started building on very early on, and we're still building on that today, it's this sense of team autonomy, of team ownership. But back then, we had teams that were very, very unbalanced. They had a lot of decision-making power, but at the same time, they were very heterogeneous. They were very siloed. So everything that depended on a team alone was working reasonably fine. Everything that did more than one team was a mess and was impossible to know and to ship features. And one of the characteristics of a scale up actually is that when you are small, 80% of the projects teams do on their own, right? They are like one team features. When you grow, 50% of the projects start being like multi-team features. So we had to fix this. But we had this thing of team autonomy that we really believed on and we really didn't want to lose. We had to couple that with accountability and ownership. So one of the things that we did is all the code is owned. There is no code that's not owned, but there is no individual ownership.
But what do you mean by owning code? Because I think that's a concept that might be different across companies. So
100%. So after defining this, that all the teams own code and all the code is owned by a team. And we don't care if there are ownership transfers, but there is never an ownership drop, right? So all the state is owned. We went to define what does ownership means. And what we did in there is an internal open source model, which is not something we have invented, but worked very well for us. The motto back there, it was from you build it, you own it, which was the baseline there. A lot of people owning stuff because they were the ones who wrote that service long ago. To you merge it, you own it. So we started to create a culture of self-service, per program, whatever you need, but never wait on another team. Send them a pull request, right? And you are not responsible for that pull request. You are not owning the result of that pull request. Whoever on that team reads that pull request and decides to merge it, that's ownership. That's where ownership starts. So you are a team, you'll receive pull requests, you own the trunk or you own the main, because you use Git, of course. This is open source. Like, this is how open source communities work. This is unfortunately quite rare at industry. But it implemented this, you merge it, you own it, which was the motto back then, that really switched a lot of the coordination dynamics, right? And really put the teams at the center, like help people self-serve. You are receiving a lot of pull requests. All right, what can you do? How can you make your code base easier to contribute? How can you educate other teams to contribute? How can you document better if that's a solution? I'm not a big fan of documentation, but sometimes that's a solution, right? And that was a huge thing, defining ownership like this, coupled with you own it, you run it. which was not the state when we joined Typeform. There was still an IT team owning Kubernetes and all the stack above that and getting every outage call. Luckily, there was a good technological foundation to switch the ownership to the teams, Kubernetes and Terraform based mostly. So as soon as we could, we flipped the switch. The teams were the ones on call. The teams were the ones receiving incidents in the middle of the night, if something. And that was really important. That was really a quality driver, because if you merge it and tomorrow there is an incident, that's on you. That's your responsibility. So fix it. Have a strategy, have whatever works for you. We're going to help you, right? But it's your decision-making power coupled with ownership and accountability. And I think this is the most important change with it technologically on the first 6 months that really had good effects on the culture and on the maturity of everything moving forward.
Actually, this is you give me a really good idea here, which is basically a lot of people, they like the idea of owning code. They don't like the reality of owning code, right? So we see it especially not only in code, but basically projects and like being an entrepreneur. And everybody loves the idea of having a company or having an open source project. And then the reality is like, I don't know if I'm going to devote so much time into it and whatnot. What kind of like problems did you encounter with teams that they were not so keen on this new model? Like the people like leave the company as a result of that, or they were relocated to other teams. Maybe they were not promoted to being tech leads and more senior positions within the company. What happened there?
We were very lean on promoting to team lead. Like if you want to lead, you have the opportunity to lead. And also we were very open on that. You can backtrack from that, right? We had actually the contrary problem. There was not a lot of people that wanted to lead. There was not a lot of people that wanted to lead people. They were not sure that would be for them. And there was also a misconception that if you go into managing this forever, I don't know why that misconception was there. So we had to
because it's always been that way. I think like people, I mean, I would still conceive that if you get promoted, because being demoted is actually like kind of like a stigma. So it would feel like you're being downgraded and you're not doing your job. I think
that's true. What we did and that's one of the things we also fixed within the first 6 months is managerial and technical track very, very clearly, and make sure the entry point of the managerial track. So the engineering manager, back then it was called team lead, now it's engineering manager, but you get the point. Like the first level of a manager, which is just for one team, is actually equivalent to an expert engineer or a senior. So if somebody goes into the track, you need to trust that person as an expert engineer too, right? And that's a prerequisite. So if somebody goes to the managerial track and they don't like it and they decide to opt out, it's not a demotion, it's a lateral move. And this This is a small, tricky thing, but we really had to clean that notion of this being being demoted. It's not. Managerial is not for everybody, but how are you going to know if you like it if you don't try, right? That's nonsense. So you have to enable that. And we had a handful of cases, like not many, but we had 2 or 3 people who did it for 6 months to a year and then decided to move to the technical track and then succeeded there. Because why not? All experiences are good. Having experience as an engineering manager is amazing if you want to go to principal, right? So we did a lot of that. We lacked more volunteers than actually people that wanted to go to the managerial track, and we had to say no.
No, the reason I think this is sort of innovative is because in Spain, traditionally, there's always, people, if you stay for long enough in the company, you're going to get pushed up and forced into management positions, regardless of whether you like it or not. And I remember when I started my career at Deloitte, it was like that. So like technically gifted people, they would quit the company because they're like, I'm not going to go into management. So therefore, what ended up happening in this company or happening is that people who were not that skilled or not that great, they were the only ones senior enough to get promoted. Therefore, you had like a really unskilled and unprepared management layers in the company. And I don't know, but they were really dysfunctional as a company. So I'm glad to hear that more companies are adopting the technical career, right? Of the lateral moves, because I think that's pretty, maybe that's a more American thing. But
I think it's pretty American. But at the same time, for us, the managerial track is we took it very seriously. Also, you are managing people. You are a people manager if you do this, right? That's not simple, right? That's a full different job and set of skills. So the same thing, you gotta try, right? But you may not like it, or you may not be up for it. So it's you don't take your more senior people and make them managers. That's not going to work. A manager is not a senior engineer or an expert engineer. It's something different.
That's a good point. There's one thing you just like barely mentioned there, and I think it's really it could open up a can of worms. But you said like, I'm not a big fan of documentation. Okay, there's two schools of thoughts here, right? And for what I've seen from the outside, what it appears when you look at Typeform is like super product oriented, innovative, like design, it's groundbreaking, whatnot. But I also like it may be because I know the company and I'm biased, but it looks like not the kind of company super structured, at least in the documentation department, right? So why is that something that you acquired from like the previous CTO or something, or that's something you deeply believe that? And how does documentation work in Typeform?
It was definitely there. Okay. There was zero.
It's not your fault. Not 100% your fault. Yeah.
But I'm going to nuance my claim if you want to go into that. Okay. I'm not a big fan of code documentation. I'm not a big fan of, and this is controversial, I guess. I'm not a big fan of unit testing. But it's not that I don't want them, right? I've seen so many times where those two things were set as the goal. And then they were cargo cult. We were doing documentation because we agreed we got to do documentation. We are doing more testing because we agreed we got to do more testing. And if you do that, you end up with dedicating a lot of effort to that, right? But at the same time, ending up with huge piles of documentations, huge battery of tests that are a serious problem to maintain and keep consistent until someday somebody just turns them off. Right. And documentation does not get turned off. It just gets, your notion grows bigger, but nobody ever goes there to read something. Right. Yeah. I'm a big fan, though, of writing things down. Right. But writing things down is less is more. You've got to write few things. They got to be very well written, and we got to really build on them. Right. On the documentation for code and testing side, where I go is to outcomes. Right. If documentation is the answer to getting less pull requests or better pull requests, easier to review pull requests, then let's look at the outcome. You should be getting less pull requests. You think documentation is the answer? Try it, right? 3 months from now, let's circle back and say, are you now getting less pull requests or are they faster to merge? If not, then maybe documentation was not the answer. So it's a solution that sometimes works, but you got to let people pick the solution. You got to let people try the solution, and you got to roll back the solution if it's not getting the outcome. I guess my reluctance on that front is the fact that I've seen so many times confuse the medium for the goal, right? And just measuring those things. And that, I think that's a very easy trap to go into.
Also, yeah, and the other thing about documentation, and maybe unit testing to the same extent, is that also the same thing. Like people like the idea of another reality. Who maintains that? Like for instance, we got a big thing here at MarsBased. Our handbook, our employee handbook, is public, right? It's on GitHub. It's available to everybody. It's open source, and I maintain that. The team takes part of it, kind of like the technical guides and whatnot. But there are some of them are a work in progress, and more often than not, we're so busy that it's kind of like, okay, we haven't updated the handbook in a year, and we changed this. This is not updated. And it's always like on me, right? Because I own it. So the point being here is like, but I think that, there are two visions of this. If it's outdated, but it's still out there, it provides value.
Yes.
And some people think like, if it's there, but it's not updated, it's detrimental to the company. And I think that I don't know where the right balance is. Like,
I wouldn't say it has value because it's out there. I think it provides value.
Like it provides value. Yeah, good point. Except that sometimes it brings SEO and people share it, and still like there's a marketing part of it, right? But yeah, you're right. People read it, but it's outdated. How are they gonna know when 50% or 70% of the times they don't know it is outdated?
Yes, right? There are two documents that I am a big fan of in companies, and I almost never find on there. And it's one of the first things I ask. And because it's documentation, but it has a very good write to read ratio, right? Okay. One of them is onboarding documentation. Which in some other companies I call like welcome trails, because it's the document somebody puts in your hand when you join the company, and it kind of welcomes you. And it's a list of things to know and things to do, right? Setting up credentials, the list of teams, who is who, like everything that's useful. I like that because it really gets a lot of things right. A lot of things that miss. You will be surprised how many companies doesn't even have a list of how many teams they have or what are the names, right? So you got to put all these things here, but at the same time, it has a very quick value. Every new recruit reads that. Sometimes even like senior people goes back to that to, where was that? Actually, there was a link somewhere to, that Datadog monitor or whatever. And you can really get the value. Like the new recruits, really on their week 2, they are in a much better place than they don't have this, with a much better experience, right? And actually, we
and
more
independently. They don't depend that much on other people. Yeah.
So the value, the like money value, if you want, of that is very, very immediate. And actually, we had an NPS on this. So we asked recruits the new onboarding. We had this. It's also self-maintaining, because at the end of that onboarding, what you put to the new recruit is your last task is to find 3 things that are wrong on this documentation and fix them.
Nice. Right? I like that.
So it just flows in a way. It's not perfect, right? But it's not a read-only thing that just drifts and gets outdated that somebody else needs to maintain. And what we did on our second year at Typeform, that it worked very, very well for onboarding, was we did a bootcamp. So after the corporate onboarding and the engineering specific onboarding, every new recruit would get 3 teams to go to. And the task was, you have 2 days to go to that team and make a code contribution. It doesn't matter what that code contribution is. You just can pick the less important user story or a cosmetic bug that is sitting on the backlog for 6 months. Like just pick something, but merge code. And that was very, very good, because the recruit would on board, would meet the people, would do internal networking. You would set the teams around the final team, right? But it would have to set up the toolings of more than one team, which would then later help on self-service, right? If you got to make a pull request, you already have the tooling installed. But also documentation-wise, it forced the teams to have their own onboarding. Like, people is going to join this team, often. Are you going to answer always the same questions? Maybe you can have a fact. Maybe you can have, this is the links to the tool set. This is how you get your stuff up. Very small, very terse, right? Like documentation, less is more, right? But up to date and with a very real and short feedback loop, right? If you don't have that well done, you got to get a recruit asking the same questions every week, right? And that worked very, very well in both getting the things documented and the experience of the newly onboarded people, which is, I think, one of the best that I've seen.
Yeah, because as you said, like you got to be like sometimes on top, because documentation is something that people don't like owning, right? So I assume that every team lead owns the documentation to their teams, that, kind of like FAQ and whatnot.
Loosely, yeah. So the engineering managers actually who championed this project and created it and gave themselves like tasks and where to put these things, but we don't care who does something within a team, right? Some teams, somebody says, I'll do it, and that's perfectly fine. But in terms of who do you put in a room in order to talk about this, yes, engineering managers.
Okay. Talking about like championing projects, and I guess that's kind of like a way to foster innovation inside the company. So I guess that you also, it seems to me that you're also kind of like the kind of company that somebody comes up with an idea and you're like, okay, fine, just come with a proposal and let's execute it if it makes sense. How do you go about this at Typeform?
There was, and this is one of the very good things of the original Typeform culture that we wanted to nurture. There was a lot, and there's always today, a lot of grassroots proposals. Like there's a lot of people who really cares and wants to champion a solution. When I joined, what I find on top of this is a lot of frustration. Because those proposals were not going anywhere, were not ended doing, and it was part of this coordination mess, right? The moment you wanted to pull more than one team together, it was very hard. So we looked at where this thing was breaking, and it was very breaking that it was failing on the proposals were not mature enough. They were not taking everybody's feedback on consideration or affected people in consideration. They didn't have like a rollout plan, these kind of things. And at the same time, they were not sponsored. Like leadership was not saying, yes, we're going to do that. And now if we say yes and we all thumbs up, now those teams are going to need to do that thing. That was also breaking. So we created something very simple, which we call standards and proposals. It's a Notion board. It's nothing fancy. Right. It's a Notion board with 4 columns, right?
No Typeform involved.
No Typeform involved. At the beginning, yes, actually, there was a Typeform inception. But I think we need something where people can really write, comment, and interact. So a wiki is the right tool. But we really focused on getting 2 things right. One is a template of what's the proposal. Like if you want to propose something, please consider these points, right? And make sure you'll get the reminders to add the right people. Like if you're going to do something that affects platform, you need somebody from platform too. Like say, looks good to me, right? And then a lot of helping people. Like you're going to make a proposal, I'm going to write it with you, right? This is one example of where I'm a big fan of writing down, but also a big fan of writing well. Right? Like writing not a lot, but writing something you can just send to somebody and they can understand without having a meeting, right? Because we also had a lot of meetings around this. And then focus on the sponsoring phase. There was a final phase. It could go to role or it could go to not for now. And that is where I invested the most, especially making sure the weight of the leadership was on rubber stamping, yes, we are doing this, now it's going to happen, right? And this is a virtuous loop, because if you don't do that, you don't get ideas. People will not invest their time into something if they don't see it makes difference. I did that, I think, very actively for a couple of quarters. And for me, that's one of the things that I'm more happy about. Very early on, people saw it worked. They started to create proposals. There is now, I think, like 20 to 30 proposals in transit at every time. Wow. We approve, I think, around 5 per quarter. Approve meaning they get done, they get shipped, and they range from Jira, code workflow, logging standards, accessibility upgrades, like GDPR compliance, like whatever. And actually, we don't nurture that a lot. And I'm not even part of the chain anymore to approve things. They just got their own dynamic, and the right people says okay, and they happen, and it's very good. That's something we're very proud of.
But actually, yeah, so the reason I brought this up is because, today, as you know, I'm flying out because we're going to the company retreat at MarsBased, our first annual retreat since 2019.
Enjoy!
Yeah, thank you. We will. And the thing is, this is actually something that came from an employee, right? Our employee, Oriol, I think it was in 2017, said, why don't we go on a company retreat? And so we, as the first-time owners of a company, are like, that's a great idea. Can you come up with a proposal? He did. It looked reasonable to us. And ever since then, we've been kind of championing and rolling out these kind of initiatives coming from the developers, from our team. And I think that's a great way to foster innovation. But there's one caveat here, which is basically that a proposal or an idea might make sense for some time, but at a certain point in time, it has to be discontinued, right? So 6 years ago, we started a musical contest. Every Friday, we would just create a playlist. Every person would just put a couple songs in it, would vote, and whoever gets the most votes decides the topic for the next week and whatnot, something like that. Made sense for 5 years. Then people grew tired of it. And we basically found out that for some months, even a year, we're just doing it for the sake of doing it because it was there. Also, we started when we started a company, we did 1 day a week of co-working space in Barcelona for the team in Barcelona, right? And then after 6 years, we saw that we were only left 3 people in Barcelona. So it didn't make sense, but we're just going there because it was existing. So what is the right moment for you to audit these things and decide this has to be discontinued? And how do you balance maybe the frustration that will create to the owner of that idea?
We actually, I don't think we need to manage that specifically. I don't remember having decommission pushback.
Maybe your examples were more technical, right?
Exactly. These are these are very technical and way of working if you want, but what you
Great.
see is that if something is not useful anymore, and or either it dies on its own or it becomes a pain. And if it becomes a pain, there is somebody who's motivated to make a counter proposal. And if you see the proposals, sometimes they are version 1, 2, and 3, or sometimes there are proposals who are getting rid of something we did before, right? So you can do that with the same process. What we also have is we had this 20% of the time on Fridays, this famous Google thing, and it was absolutely not working. And this is where a lot of the things you are mentioning will fall, right? That was absolutely self-organized. Do whatever you want with this time, but not much got done. And I don't mean business-wise.
Same happened to us.
Even for the people, like you would go back to people and say, okay, what did you got out of the last 3 months of that 20% time? People would say not much, right? And the reason for that is very break. It lacks focus. You cannot do anything ambitious. Like the best thing you can do is go read a book, right? Or have a solo project that will probably not take off because 2 hands are not enough. So what we did is move all those days at the end of the quarter. They just happen to be around 2 weeks. That just happens to be our sprint size still. So we call that hive sprint. Back then we called everything bee things. So we had swarms and hives and colonies. So that is gone, but this is the hive sprint. And we just said, it's the same thing. Have fun, right? Learn, do whatever. We're going to have a kickoff on the first day so people can propose, hey, I'm going to do this. Who wants to join me? I'm going to have a demo at the end. And it's not mandatory to demo. Like you want to show something, show it. You don't want to show something, that's fine. And it absolutely blew our mind what happened the first quarter. We had, I think, 15 demos, and half of them were product features. So we've done that since then. I think now we are doing our 9th edition of the high sprints, and that's morphing. Like some people was doing trainings, now they are gone. Some people was doing lunch and learns, now they have been assisted by something else. Now, last high sprint, some teams decided to have a Hive conference. Where one day they just, gather talks, and there is like lightning talks of 40 minutes internally, which is something now we are thinking about even opening to the outside to external people. That is absolutely unmanaged. I cannot claim any credit out of this. This is the people just doing their best out of that time. If you set the right envelope, right, which is enough time, enough focus, and celebration at the end, which is very important.
I think that you kind of like we came to the same conclusion because we started off doing also this 20% rule in MarsBased, but because we kept it as a metric, as a goal, it was like we ended up doing it because it was a goal. But it should be the ways to achieve something else. Like for instance, keep all of our open source projects updated. How do we do that? By having the 20% rule, right? But it's funny because like when you were mentioning this, it was like, okay, now I understand what had happened. It never dawned on me until now. So thank you.
You know how I explained this to my CEO. First, it was easy because the time was already there, right? It was 20% of time already going there. So it was not a case for we need to start doing this. It was a case for we need to make something out of it, and let's not kill it. Let's try something, right? But the actual outcome was, let's get better engagement out of people. Let's get activity. Let's not get a particular kind of activity or a particular kind of output. And also, it's intelligence. Let's see where people goes if you gave them 2 weeks. What are they going to do? Are they going to fix technical debt? Are they going to build features? Are they going to build features about this or about that? That is a very important thermometer of the organization, right? We just learn a lot just by watching the demos and seeing where people decided to put their time. If you direct them to something, you lose this, right? They will try to do that or maybe not, right? But most importantly, you'll lose the signal. Where would they go for 2 weeks? And actually, we do that a lot. We do that 2 weeks every quarter. So we do that 8 weeks a year. But we do that because 6 to 7 features end up on the product because of it every quarter.
Wow. Without giving them clear directions, which I think it's even more innovative, if you will.
Obviously, you don't get that business feature that enterprise customers are asking for.
No,
but you get dark mode on the builder, which is something we didn't have, or you get accessibility upgrades, or you get like new integrations, like very cool stuff. that obviously product organization is very focused on business, right? And that's their job, and that's good. But there is low-hanging fruit that can be done, and it makes a difference.
That actually can be a good idea in order to kind of like segue into employee hiring and talent retention, which is a word I don't like. But you mentioned, I remember when we met, you mentioned a couple of times the zero friction deployment. I don't know if you want to explain that, because I think that's kind of like groundbreaking, and I think a lot of people could profit from borrowing that idea from you.
I think it's something, not sure we have invented that, but it's something that I don't know why only big players can do, right? I think you talk about the 4 key metrics, you talk about change frequency, right? Like how many times can a developer change the product per day or something like this. Yeah. And it sounds like what Netflix would do, what Facebook would do. But obviously they have a level of platforming that you cannot do, but the same logic can still apply. And that's what we did actually 2 years ago with the 4 key metrics, and which means essentially starting to measure how many times we're changing the product and starting to measure how much time it takes for a change to go from idea to production, or very concretely, from code ready to deployed. And then we started doing platform projects actually to accelerate this. We did that on a belief, and that is where maybe we tap into retention, right? It's our belief that when you join a small company, what you like a lot is that empowerment, that that there is not a lot of legacy. You can do a lot of things. There's nobody stopping your deployment. There is nobody stopping. You can self-service a lot. As you grow, because of coordination, because of process, quality concerns, these things start to get away from you, right? And if you go to the most corporate companies, it's amazing how those developers even can develop something, right? How far they are from the product production or even customer feedback, right? So we wanted to make sure our platform strategy was to keeping that as lean as possible, on the belief that this would get not productivity, most engaged people, right? People who really thought they would go to work the next day and have a say on their way of working and what to do on the product, which if you're going to put them on call for incident is also necessary, right? You just need them to be able to fix something without getting somebody else's approval in 4 a.m. in the morning. So we did a number of things in that regard. It's very Kubernetes based, but actually we have like blue-green deployments. So we have zero downtime. That there's no penalization for making a deployment. Just buy the infrastructure so you can do as many as you want. We have canary and we have automatic rollbacks. Canary meaning you can deploy a new service and the platform will incrementally give you traffic to the new service. And automatic rollbacks meaning teams have a YAML on their repositories. And again, it's very important that they own this, right? That's not something that somebody does for them. They can tap into a Datadog monitor. They can set a threshold and they can say, if this number goes above X, and the common thing here is error rate, but you could do latency, you could do whatever. Just automatically change my rollback might change, which just gives them this peace of mind. I can be brave and I won't break stuff. I think today we have an average of 1,000 deployments a month, which for our number of developers, it's like 2 per person per day. That's a lot. And
to production.
To production, yes, live production.
That is insane, yeah.
And we also are very proud of our change failure rate, which means 5% of these changes generate a mistake and a defect, which can be cosmetical. It doesn't necessarily need to be an outage.
Yeah, or just unnoticed. I take it that sometimes like you see it on your Sentry row or whatever, but on Datadog, but like nobody else will see it because it's an edge case or maybe it's something like, or
an accent that's missing on a word. Like that's an incident for us too. Everything that happens on production, it's an incident for us. We have business severities, and the lowest important one is cosmetic ones. But that 5% of those changes generate an incident or a defect, which is very, very low and gives us a lot of peace of mind. And we have built all our structure around that, just trying to protect this. So we are very wary when we want to put something on the deployment pipeline. Anything. are you sure you want that in the delivery pipeline? Is that going to make it lengthy and time consuming and slower more than ever? And we try to actively remove things from it without losing the security, right? But making sure the friction is very, very small, which forces us to adopt other quality strategies, of course, to do things in a different way.
So following up on this, what do you think, like if you were a developer at Typeform today, what would be the single key thing that keeps you in the company? If you had to single out one thing only.
I know I can I mention two?
Okay, yeah, you can mention two. Very briefly, because we're running out of time.
Okay, and this is not my belief. This is what developers say very, very openly. Number one is the people, the other developers, their teammates. That's the number one reason. We know that it shows up on every survey and every interview. It's very, very clear. Number two is the product. Really, we are a very product-oriented company. People is here because the product is a lot of love to the product. That's why making sure people can make a difference on the product, it's so tied to engagement for us.
Okay. Two real quick questions before we wrap this up. One of them is what is Typeform's tech stack, basically?
Wow, okay. That's not a quick question in a company like ours. On the infrastructure layer is all Kubernetes orchestrated by Terraform. Above of this, we have a little bit of Python over there, mostly Go across all the backend. We have a BFF of JavaScript. We are now migrating to GraphQL. Everything on the front end, which is 70% of our code, there's a lot of code on the front end, of course, is React with some TypeScript that we are now deploying. And this is one of the changes that people championed, by the way. Mm-hmm. And then you get your usual stack of Datadog, Kibana, yada, yada.
Okay, that was pretty fast, though. Yeah, I thought you were going to go for like full on 5 minutes rambling about this and that and this microservice, that one.
No, it's very heterogeneous. And that's good because we are not dictating stacks. Like people can do whatever they want, but the tooling is so good they don't. Right, which is where you want to be.
Yeah.
I just forget. We also do feature launching. All the code we launch is under the feature flag, and that helps us a lot also in quality strategy. And we use Dark Launcher for that.
And also, but like that tech stack is, I take it, it's shared among the other two products that you've got, right? I know one of them is Video Ask. I don't know if the other one is public already or not, but
not yet.
Do they share the same tech stack?
On the infrastructure layer, yes. Video has decided to go to Django and Python. On the back end, still React on the front end, but that's okay for us. Now they are migrating not to Go, to the infrastructure and the modern, and more secure Terraform modules, but they are going to leave as a Python application, which is just okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Last one. And I think this is kind of like where we get the most, like the funniest answers, but can you tell us what has been your biggest technical fuck up in the company? Like, you got to own it. It's got to be yours, not somebody else's. And not I hired the wrong people. Don't go into that bullshit. It's just like something that you actually, you coded, you approved that deployment, something like that, and you fucked up big time.
I think that the biggest issue we had is that I accepted, or I decided to go on a project of writing our own secure REST. We use an event sourced architecture with the secure REST, and we back then it was my decision to say we're not ready for Kafka and something like this. Like that's above. Let's keep it small. And we suffered a lot because of that decision. We had a lot of outages because of that until we finally moved to Kafka and stuff like this, which we did last year.
But what was
that's on me.
What was your okay? The decision was yours, or like
Yeah. I mean, at Typeform, when I joined, there was already, where I said 60 developers. So I'm luckily not the one that created many pull requests.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This has been fantastic. 1 minute for you to say, how can we help you? How can we help Typeform from our community?
Well, I think one of the reasons why I came here is to show all the amazing things we are doing and engineering-wise. So if what we did is appealing to you, if you want to have this relationship with design, with product, with innovation, and you like what you hear in terms of how we are enabling developers, I would say hit the careers page.
I 100% subscribe to that. Been a huge fan of Typeform over the years. So, well, thank you for your time, Pau. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge, and see you in the next one.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Bye.